The Fort Tabor-Fort Rodman Historical Association, in conjunction with New Bedford Cable TV, is bringing you a series of interviews with local citizens that we are labeling Heroes Among Us. These are individuals who have experienced the trauma, the confusion, and the drama of war. My name is Joseph Langlois. I'm president of the Fort Tabor-Fort Rodman Historical Association. Those seen in this series are ordinary individuals who were confronted by extraordinary events that demanded at times more than they may have thought they were capable of enduring. They experienced situations that were impossible to imagine in civilian life. Some of those interviewed participated in historic military engagements, while others were often involved in conflicts that were kept from the public for years. We will not be discussing strategies or outcomes, but rather take a more focused, a more personal, and a more intimate account of events. We've decided to commit ourselves to this work, as history is often easily forgotten, distorted, or placed in well-written books, once read, that may never be taken off the shelf again. Most often, the roles of thousands of seamen, soldiers, airmen, and officers are often lost in time. Our hope is to preserve their memory, record their experiences, and allow others to learn from the bravery, the courage, and the indefinable spirit that mankind is capable of during periods of intense stress of the type that is often encountered during war. Today we're talking with Mr. Norman Chartier. Mr. Chartier was a member of the 4th Division during World War II. He was involved in the exercise Tiger. He landed with them at Utah Beach. He helped in establishing a hospital in France. He was at the Battle of the Bulge. He crossed the Siegfried Line. And his tour of duty in Europe ended 20 miles past Dachau.
And this is me on the Siegfried Line. It's not a clear picture, but that's in full regalia, ready for war. One time one of these things fell off, rolled down a hill.
Oh boy.
And I thought sure it would go, but the ring never came out. So I was, and there, you see the bump there? That's my meal. They had K rations, and it would come in square boxes. And in order to that's what you had. What you had is what you see. You didn't carry anything else. You had a spoon in your shoe in case you had a hot meal, and you had that box over there, that box of food, and you carry an extra box so you wouldn't be without. And that's what I did. See, I carry an extra box, stockings and food under my clothing. That was a big cement. On a Siegfried Line, a bunker. This fella here, Mexican kid, he didn't last long. He got killed along the way. I never knew what happened to him. He disappeared. Yeah. That's what happens. And I sent my mother this picture after the war. She passed out. She was so concerned. I was freezing to death. It was cold, but I mean, I should have never sent her pictures like that, you know. But there was. To a mother, she sees things that I don't see. At the very beginning, when I went to basic training, I went induction, and they said, well, you have a choice of either being a musician or a medic. Well, I couldn't see myself playing a bugle on the docks and seeing all the guys go overseas. I says, no, I think I'll try for the medic. So I went to school, basic training. Most of it was classroom. I never did have too much a close order drill and all that stuff that the soldiers go through. I had very little. It was in classrooms. Then I went to a surgical, to advanced medical school for a surgical technician. And I worked in the OR. I worked on medical wards. I removed sutures and things like that, you know, with the assistance of the doctor. And I really worked hard, 12 hours a day. I was even in Claiborne, Louisiana. But I didn't really mind it because them poor fellas, they were not war casualties. They were civilians in the United States. I mean, it takes general hospitals to take care of all this army. It's tremendous. Appendix and whatever comes up, and that's what I did as a surgical technician. I really enjoyed being a medic. When we landed in England in February, we landed in what they call Bishop's Lydiard. It was a little village 7 miles outside of Taunton, and we established a general hospital there. We had 100 nurses, we had 56 surgeons, and 500 personnel, technicians, motor pool, cooks, everything. And we were taking care of the general army population that was ill, like big general hospital. And then later on, in April, we started to get patients in from Exercise Tiger. They were quite wounded. They were, and we were told to treat them as veterinarians and ask no questions, and they shouldn't be talking to you. So that's the first impulse that I had, that there was something drastic going on in England. Miss Valentine was a nurse, and a very young nurse, and I went there at a card store to buy a Valentine card for my mother, and there I got acquainted. We started to talk, and I thought she was kidding me when she said her name was Pearl Valentine, because that's the day I was buying the card for my mother. Anyway, we started to talk, and she mentioned her duties as a nurse, and she'd go out at night during after bombings and pick up little infants that were abandoned in houses and in the street. The parents were killed, and they would she would take these little babies and bring them home. And when they accumulated over 9 or 10, she would find some other homes for them. And that's what little Pearl did.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
Yeah. And I think during the bombing, bus bombs, especially at midnight, they would always come, the Germans would always come between 12 and 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, okay.
That's when they would send these bombs, and you never know where they can. In fact, at Bishop's Lydiard in the hospital, we had no foundation, no cellar. We had to take some of the patients out at midnight and put them in the trenches along the wards, so they could have some protection. Others that were couldn't take them out of bed, we'd put another mattress on top of them. And that was our duty between 12 and 2. We'd work 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. There was no let up at all. So.
How long were you in England before?
About 9 months. Yeah. Before the invasion.
Before the invasion, yes.
Yeah, and before the invasion, just before the invasion, we were told that we were going to be replaced by another general hospital because we were quite experienced. A new group was coming in to replace us at Slapton Sands. So we were all shipped over to Salisbury Plains, where the historic Stonehenge is.
Yes.
The rocks there, and we were billeted there in pup tents. As far as you can see, thousands of pup tents waiting for the invasion. We really didn't know what was going on, but that's what we were told to stay there. And of course, we visited the Stonehenge, and we waited our turn to go to Normandy.
Planes line up to take part in the greatest air invasion in history by the first Allied Airborne Army. Americans, British, and Canadians make up this armada for a crossing of the Rhine in the north near Basel. 1,500 planes and gliders haul both men and heavy equipment in this leapfrog over German positions east of the Rhine. This trip is really necessary for victory as the first planes get away. Tow ropes are carefully guided to avoid fatal snarls. It's a gigantic task to get the troop planes and gliders away from their bases in England safely. A job without precedent in military annals. Takeoff instructions go to the transports when the gliders are once on their way. Winston Churchill and General Eisenhower observe progress from the ground near the Rhine. And then the Prime Minister takes a vantage point with Sir Alan Brooke as plane after plane nears the objective. 8th Air Force and British cameramen made these pictures as the men alert for the jump. And this is it. The C-46 plane enables the men to drop from both sides, 18 at a time, speeding up the operation. In a matter of seconds, the sky is filled with billowing parachutes.
The landing in Utah Beach was, there were the 4th Division landed, the 90th Division landed, the 70th Armored Division, they all landed. And after a while, there were so many people on the beaches, they were backed up one and back of the other. They couldn't get off of the beach fast enough. And eventually, we got to, I landed there as a general hospital. Mm-hmm. We landed there, and we were told to stay on the beach until they could secure some land around Martinsburg. Now, Martinsburg, they went in there on the 7th of June, and they didn't take over until the 20th of June. That's how long it took just to take a little town that was only about 5 miles away from the beach. Yeah. But we had to stay there. Finally, we found our way between Martinsburg and Saint-Mary-de-Église. Saint-Mary-de-Église is another little town, maybe 10 miles apart. That was in July by the time they took that. So good. So they weren't advancing too fast.
The progress was very slow.
Very, very slow on the first time. Like I said, the 20th of June, I remember that day distinctly because that's when we finally went into Martinsburg. When we went into Martinsburg, there were only 30 civilians left in the town. It was flattened out. 30 civilians, and there were 7 German soldiers and 7 American soldiers left in that town. And the 30 that came out, they were so happy to see us after us bombing their town. It's unbelievable the way it happens, you know. Then finally we went to Saint-Mary-de-Église, and we set up a hospital station there.
Tell us some details about setting up that hospital.
The hospital station, we had huge tents that normally we shouldn't have, but we had them in case we couldn't find a building for a hospital. So we set up a huge tent there. We set up our ambulances, and after a while, we had a lot of patients coming in from the 4th Division. That's when I was getting to be familiar with the 4th Division. And so many of them, poor fellows, went there. The 4th Division started to go up to Cherbourg, and some stayed around Saint-Mary-de-Église. And so anyway, we took care of the patients over at Saint-Mary-de-Église, yeah, the little town there, yeah. And that was also flattened out quite a bit. Yeah. On the 2nd of August, Patton came into the picture later on, you know, in July. He finally came in with his 3rd Army, and after we left Saint-Mary-de-Église, we headed for that Rennes, France, and looked for a building, an existing building. So we, on the 2nd of August, like I say, I don't, some dates I remember, some I don't. Anyway, on August the 2nd, we managed to start to penetrate into Rennes. It took about 2 weeks before it was really cleared, enough to find a hospital. In the meantime, while we're waiting to go into Rennes, we went to Mont Saint-Michel. There's about about 10 of us. We went there just to check up if there were any Germans up there, and there were. It was clean. They didn't have anyone there, but it was very. It was a nice sightseeing tour anyway to visit Mont Saint Michel. So finally we got to Rennes, and lo and behold, the officer says, well, he had chosen me as an interpreter because I was the only one that could really speak French.
Yes.
So that's why I was in a jeep with him and the driver and 2 officers, a lieutenant and a colonel, and which were the staff of the 127th General Hospital. And we went to Rennes, and finally we ran across this huge hospital, Hôtel Dieu, they call it. Mm-hmm. So we went in there, and when we went in, there were Germans in there. The whole staff of the hospital, half of the hospital was Germans. So our colonel went over to that German head surgeon, and they shook hands, and they saluted each other and exchanged their little swords that they have, you know, and very, very professional. And they exchanged that, and the general took off. And then the colonel says, Norman, we have to clear one department after a time. We can't take all the Germans out at one time because we wouldn't know what the patients need and all that. So we did that. We went to the orthopedics ward. We exchanged our orthopedic people with theirs. We exchanged that. We went to the surgical wards, medical wards, and we went to different departments, sure. Pharmacy, and it took about 3 days to exchange all these people. We took 2 hours, and I came in. So that was quite a task in itself, and it was really professionally done. Now, half of the other half of the hospital were run by nuns, yes. Religious, they were civilians, so we didn't bother them too much.
But sometimes they had some requests for you.
Oh, they had many times. Later on in time, they found out that the coal or the supplies would come in only on one part of the hospital, the military. And so the Germans used to supply the nuns with whatever they needed. But for some reason, we didn't, because I guess they didn't know the formula of always have to. So at night, I would have to play Robin Hood. I would go with a couple of guys. We'd have these flatbed wagons. We'd load it up with coal, and we'd sneak at 2 o'clock in the morning. The guys would let us go by. We'd bring the coal to the other side of the hospital for the nuns, so they could have hot water at least. And then sometimes I go to the pharmaceutical places, and I would try to see if I can get equipment, bandages, and various things that the poor nuns needed. Sure. So I would also get that, but it was always after 5 o'clock at night. After I left Rennes, France, later part of September, we had a lot of patients come in from the 4th Division, and these fellows really impressed me. And I asked my commander if I could join the combat medics instead of a surgical technician. That's what I went to school for, as a surgical technician, but I want to be. So he says, all right, but he says, I can't guarantee you that you're going to be a medic, because they need a lot of firepower right now. I'll take the chance. So I went over and I joined the 4th Infantry Division, and they put me in C Company, and I became a rifleman. And that wasn't what I wanted, but that's what they chose me to be. That's what happened to you. Yes, I had that rifle, and I had to do my job, and it wasn't very pleasant. No. But although being a medic, unofficially, I managed to take care of the wounded anyway. Sure. Whatever I had to work with. Finally, February, the beginning of February, a lieutenant came in, and they wanted to form a raider platoon. They needed someone to penetrate the German lines and establish communications and rescue people and blow up whatever was necessary that prevented the infantry to advance. So Tony Pellegrino came into the picture late. He came in November. He was in the National Guards, but he was a tremendous man for map reading and compass. He was for terrain. He was very good. So he finally established the raiders by taking 2 men, volunteers from each company of the battalion. That's why they call them the Battalion Night Raiders. 2 men, volunteers. And we formed this group, maybe of about 20 men. And we got training and firing different weapons. And we would go out on missions at night. It was night raiders. I don't know how he did it, but he was a very patient lieutenant. With this man, I only lost 1 fella in a raid. The other 3 got wounded. It seems that during this raid, we went into this abandoned house. There's one of the fellas, and Tony says he heard a screaming artillery shell coming in. It makes a whistle. We can tell. And it exploded. And one of the fellas in the building, Tony says, "Everybody take cover." And he didn't. He stood up, and there was a blanket on the window. He moves the blanket, and of course he got ripped. His carotid artery. Cut his carotid artery, and I couldn't control the bleeding. He died on me. Yeah, I'm sorry, Joe.
No, that's quite all right now.
But he died. I couldn't save him. But the other 3 I could save on that one mission, yeah. But we went on several missions like that to save people. There was a fellow one time in the Raiders. He was in K Company, and we learned through the intelligence that he was about 5 miles in the German lines, beyond the German lines. And we were supposed to go save him. So we went up there. On our bellies, we crossed little streams, barbed wires. It took almost all night. We finally reached him. He was in a barn, big barn, and we finally got to him, and he says, "Oh, these 2 German, older German mother and her husband, mother and the husband. Yeah, one fed him, and the other took care of him for 2 days and 2 nights in a barn. But before that, he was out in a field trying to take care of himself quite a while. We don't know how long, but I mean, for 2. So when it was time to leave, we took a door off the building, and we put him on there. And we tried to carry him back. So the mother and father says, "We want to go too." They wanted to come back. They wanted to come back with us, and we didn't know if it was a wise thing to do. But Tony says, "We'll do anything." I mean, if they're that desperate and they took care of this fellow, they deserve to come back. Now there was a question there whether Tony claims that the 2 little kids came too. But I never saw the 2 little kids, so it's a question. It's a gray area whether the little kids came or not. But I don't know who took care of the animals. But anyway, they came back with us all night long, crawling to take care of this fellow back
Not
home.
an easy thing to do.
No.
Not easy at all.
No. Well, that was a Raider's job. And there was several things. Another time, the Raiders, we had Snyder. He was a German-born. And Snyder was he was quite a fighter. He was my foxhole buddy. We would take buddies to dig foxholes. Right. he was over there one time, and he says, I'm just jumping over a little bit, but we were on a way down towards past the Siegfried line, and he says, "You know, the next town is where I was born and brought up in." And he tells Tony, "I don't want to go in that town because, you know, I love my parents, but I don't like what they did. They were hardcore Nazis." So he asked Tony if we could go around that town, skip that town. And he warned all the people in the first town not to say a word, and in the past not to say that they saw me. He threatened them with that, you know, because he didn't want to hurt their parents. Anyway, Snyder, one time, we were on a mission to attack what they call a machine gun nest. The Germans had this position up on a hill overlooking the town of Furen. And the G Company wanted to take that town, but they were blocked by this machine gun nest.
Right.
And the raiders had to go up there. So we climbed up this area to take them out. Evidently, somebody threw a flare up in the sky. And it lit up the whole sky like daylight. And we're out there, the little snow on the ground, we stuck out like a sore thumb, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
So when that happened, Frank wanted to shoot, but his fire jammed, his rifle misfired, and he dropped it, and he played dead. He just fell where he was. The Germans came over to him, and we ran away because we were trying to look for cover. We didn't realize that Frank's not with us. So we turned around, started to come back. Then we see Frank, the Germans are kicking him in the ribs. They were kicking him and rolling him over and really doing a job on him to see if he was alive. And he played dead. He could understand German, so he knew what they were talking about. So he could play along with them, you know. So poor Frank, the Germans took his overshoes off. They figured they'll take his shoes, and they took. I always said they took one shoe off, but Tony says they took his two shoes. So again, it's a question, a little slight thing. Anyway, and we rescued Frank, and we wiped all that nest out. Then G Company advanced and took the town of Furen, and that was our mission was complete.
Bastogne in Belgium will long be remembered as the site of the heroic stand of the isolated 101st Airborne Division. Supreme Commander Eisenhower, in the midst of historic battlefields, honors the Screaming Eagles in a ceremony without parallel in war history.
It is a great personal honor for me to be here today, to take part in a ceremony that is unique in American history. Never before has a full division been cited by the War Department in the name of the President for gallantry in action.
Watching the presentation is screen actress Marlene Dietrich. The 101st withstood von Rundstedt's final effort to break the Allied offensive when he endeavored to spearhead an attack through Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. General Eisenhower himself salutes the heroic division, whose commander, General McAuliffe, turned down the German demand for surrender with the famous word, nuts. Against heavy odds, the Yanks stood firm. From such bravery, victory is forged.
The Battle of the Bulge, it was cold. It was in January around that time, and it was so miserably cold that you couldn't really concentrate. You try to dig a hole, you couldn't because the ground was frozen, so you'd try to find a bomb shelter to get into and cover it with branches or anything for the night, at least sleeping. And it's so cold that you would take your feet and bang them against the edge of the hole to keep the circulation going.
Sure. Yeah.
And if you didn't, you'd lose your feet. Now, being a medic, I was a little smarter. I had extra stockings I would put in my shirt, right on my skin, and would keep them warm. And I would change often. Well, these fellas probably wouldn't go without changing stockings for a couple of weeks even.
Yeah.
And to a point where the frost got the best of them. But I think that was the worst thing about them. And the branches, too. The Germans would fire up in the trees. The branches would fall down. We had no protection. If you didn't get killed from a bullet, you would get wiped out by the branches. Yeah, because one time, I like to talk about Ginette de Chardin too. But anyway, the Battle of the Bulge, that was I think the worst thing was the cold. Yes. And trying to orientate yourself to do your job where you couldn't really concentrate even though it was so cold. And that's why I had one time I was going along and we had quite a battle going on there, and the soldiers were falling all around, and I was trying to patch them up, and try to save as many as I can. With the ones that were severely bleeding. The others, well, it wasn't too bad. Try to save the ones that were.
Sure.
And we went ahead. Then we got pushed back by the Germans, because that was a back and forth kind of thing many times. I come back about 2 weeks later, and I saw the same people I had patched up, and they were frozen to death. Yeah, they didn't. Nobody picked them up after I took care of them.
Yeah, they're still there.
Yeah, they were still there, and that's no good, you know. But
No.
that's war, you know. That's all wars. Yeah.
I know you took some pride in being able to participate in some of the masses in France.
Yes.
Tell us how Mass was conducted.
Well, Mass was conducted on the battlefield or in France before we had chapels. Father McAndrew would have his assistant, like an altar boy assistant, and he would set up Mass on spread it on the altar cloth on top of the Jeep, the motor of a Jeep, on the hood of a Jeep. Put it on the hood of a Jeep, and he would participate. He would say the Mass there, and all his the Catholic members of the unit, the 127 General Hospital, they would come and attend Mass. And sometimes, if there were any other soldiers in the vicinity, they would also come, because there were no other masses being said, you know, on the battlefield. So that's what it is. And then sometimes there was another place there besides the Mass. We in another area where it was kind of, the ground was kind of like an amphitheater kind of thing, like this
Yes.
one. And here they would use that for announcements. And one time they asked me to go up there and speak a little French, so they would know different phrases that they would want to use.
Teaching
The soldiers different phrases in French,
Yes.
so they could communicate a little better. Some of them I'm not going to tell you, but anyway.
Let's get back to the Mass. How was it to be able to participate in a religious observance?
It was very relieving, because it helped us, you know, spiritually and mentally to accept what was going on, the hardships of the wounded, take care of the wounded, and that was at the time that was my feel, is to make sure that they were taken care of,
Yes.
the best they can, and of course Mass really helped. And then later on, when I left the General Hospital and became a combat medic, discontinued, because the priests, the chaplains, they had none in the battlefields. Right. Further in actual combat, they had very few chapels, because they couldn't spare them that much. So they would take the medics, and very few people knew that, but they would train the medics to be like a chaplain. We have a little prayer book with us, and we would, while we were taking care of the wound, we would also say a little prayer with them, or ask them to pray with us.
Yes.
And many soldiers probably never prayed before, but like I said, there's no atheists on the battlefield.
No.
They learned in a hurry, and they begged me to teach them even to say the Our Father. They had no idea of what prayer was until they got hit right between the eyes, you know. And that was, I felt comfortable with that too. Now, when there was one time near the Siegfried line somewhere, I got hit twice over here on my leg with shrapnel. I took care of it myself, because I was a medic. I took the tweezers out and I pulled the stuff out and I bandaged myself all up. And what saved it to be further is, in that pocket I had on my leg was my identification tags that you put on a soldier when he got wounded. You identify the wound, when the tourniquet was applied and all that. It's on there. Well, and a little prayer book. Well, that shrapnel went through all that paperwork and embedded itself in my leg. So therefore, I had very little damage to my leg due to the prayer book and the first aid.
And the label.
And identification tags. Yeah. So that saved my leg. So I just have two little, I pulled them out, and I didn't want to go to the hospital or report it because I'd lose my position in the Raiders. Once sometimes you get hospitalized, you don't go back to your unit. They put you in a replacement center somewhere. Right. God knows where you go. By the time we got to Dachau, it was the F Company, or our battalion, was going to take Dachau, but we found out that once we got there, another division had been in there already. So what we did was clean up kind of thing. So they told me, Norman, he says, Lieutenant says, you go to the boxcars over there and mark, and he gave me some chalk, mark on there off limits. And I says, why? He says, well, because he says we have a lot of new recruits that just come in, replacements, because we didn't know how long the war would last. Sure. And they brought the division or the battalion up to par, because we were down to 5 rounds of ammunition. We were down to 8 men to a company. We were wiped out completely. We weren't ready to fight anymore. And it was a good thing it was towards the end of the war. So he said, well, up there, and to keep these young fellas, new recruits, away from seeing the bodies, because they weren't used to seeing death. You know, it had just come in replacements. So that's what my job was, to keep them young ones away from the box, because they were loaded with bodies, nude bodies, stunk. That you could smell the stench of death throughout that town. And the Germans denied it. They didn't know nothing about it.
Yeah, and it's hard that they could have denied that.
Well, it was because they didn't want to get. If they talked about it, they probably would get fired or killed or whatever. So they denied it. But you could smell it even before you went to Dachau. Even towards München, you could smell it. Yeah. So that was our temporary job. Now, once we hit München, we took that farmhouse, I can tell you. After that, the Germans were surrendering so many, that there were long lines of them. They had their hands up in the air. They were starving. They had nothing to eat. I remember one time they brought a flatbed little wagon loaded with round little breads. Hard as a rock, you could kill somebody with them if you hit them. And that's what they had to eat. That's all they had to eat. And they were surrendering. So there weren't much fighting going on after München to Tigris, or that little last little town.
Right.
There was very little fighting. Most of the fighting, the severe fighting, was in the Battle of the Bulge and the forest. We didn't see too much of the forest. We saw some of it, but most of it was the Bulge down in Luxembourg, the bottom of Luxembourg, and up the Siegfried Line. The Siegfried Line, that's where I got shot in the head. I got shot at the upper part of my helmet. The bullet went in the helmet and it damaged embedded itself in the liner, in the helmet liner. Sure. There's 2 parts to a helmet, and that's what it is. And I put my helmet, I touched my head, it was dry. I said, hey, I guess it didn't hurt me any. So I put
must have a hot head.
So I put my helmet back on, and a little while later, one of the lieutenants, I don't know who he was, in the field, he says, hey soldier, get rid of that helmet. I said, well, that's the only one I have. He says, well, we have some more recruits coming in. We don't want to have them see that hole in your helmet. So
they were very protective of these recruits.
They didn't want to hurt their feelings, I guess. So we got a hold of them, and I finally, oh yeah, he says, you go out on the battlefield, the first one you see on the ground, there's quite a few around, they're all over there, poor guys, they die. Yeah. And I got another helmet, I've replaced the one with a hole in it.
Members of the Allied Control Commission for Germany arrive at Marshal Zhukov's headquarters in Berlin to sign the joint agreement. General Eisenhower is on hand to represent the United States. Marshal Zhukov makes it official for Russia, and Monty adds his signature for Britain. The next to ratify the agreement is France's General de Tassigny, who is followed by our own Ike. Official British pictures of the men who will control the post-war destiny of Germany.
After the war, I came back home, and on my brother's birthday, and I came to the States on November the 4th, and I got this job on November the 4th, but I reached home on my birthday, November 6th. So that was quite a birthday party. And then I says, well, I was going to go back to work at a cushion company. I was like a monitor there, or a supervisor at the time. And so I said, I'm going to try to see if I can continue my medical experience, you know, work in the medical field. So I went to St. Luke's. They had a school there, nursing school.
Yes, they did.
And I went in there and I applied. I says, I would like to continue my education, be a nurse or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have facilities for male nurses. So that wiped me out. So
yeah, only for ladies.
Only for ladies,
only
no
for
male nurses, and that kind of hurt my feelings a little bit.
Yeah.
So I says, okay. I went to the Red Cross and I became a first aid instructor, advanced first aid instructor for the Red Cross. Then I became an EMT on John and Alden Ambulance Corps. I joined an ambulance corps, and I made many trips to Boston with little babies, you know, that had to be hospitalized. Yeah. The saddest thing is to come home without the baby. The baby stayed and the mother came in. The mother would be sitting in the back, and I could see in my rearview mirror the mother wrapping a blanket and holding the blanket as a little baby, you know. Yeah. Some more of that stuff. But anyway, but that's what I did to satisfy myself.
Sure, absolutely.
And then I became an emergency at the cushion company. I became a squad leader for the emergency, in case they were emergent first aid.
Like a medical emergency.
A medical emergency. And if anything happened, I would respond to an accident. I pulled a couple of fellas out that were entangled in machinery, lost their arms and everything. Yeah. And it was one fellow one time got caught in a machine, and we tried to pull him out, and his whole arm came out of the socket. He was so mangled, you know.
Yeah.
And so I kind of continued.
Yeah, you never backed away from.
No.
At times, it proved to be horrible situations.
Then I decided to be a Boy Scout, scout leader.
Scout leader.
And I was over 50 years I was in scouting. I made a couple of trips to New Mexico on expeditions with scouts. I went to the national jamborees, and I got almost every award that you can get in scouting, including the Silver Beaver, you know. So.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Well, Norman, I want to thank you very much for giving us this time and for sharing these experiences. Some heart-wrenching, others humorous, and really wonderful to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
What you have just seen and heard is an account of a local citizen as he experienced the trauma of war. The goal of the Fort Taber Fort Robin Historical Association, in conjunction with New Bedford Cable Access TV, in bringing you this interview, was not to glorify war, but rather keep the memory of these brave individuals alive as they experience these hellish events. We must remember the price of freedom and the sacrifice that these individuals have given for the people and the country that they love. Their courage serves as a role model for individuals of all ages that when confronted with stress and seemingly insurmountable problems, that we must face them boldly and with courage. Finally, we hope to demonstrate that in this small corner of the nation, we are filled with individuals who have behaved heroically and have contributed significantly to the history and the well-being of our nation. We want to thank you for watching Heroes Among Us.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it.
Something good is happening in the city, and it involves the color blue. Ma'am, I notice you have a blue bin in front of your house here. Why is that?
Because it makes me feel good.
Oh.
By recycling, I'm doing my part in preventing pollution and global warming.
Well, I notice you have flattened cardboard here in your bin.
Oh, but more as well. You can recycle old newspapers, magazines, catalogs, and old phone books, as well as cans, soda cans, and 2 types of plastic, number 1 and number 2.
1 and 2. Well, is there anything left for the trash man?
No, not really.
When you recycle, the trash man takes less trash to our landfill. If everyone in the city recycled, our landfill would last a long time. Just set your blue bin out on your regular trash collection day. Fill it with flattened cardboard, newspapers, magazines, phone books, metal cans, glass bottles, and now all plastic containers number 1 through number 7, as well as office paper, junk mail, and plastic bags. To request a free recycling bin, call 508-979-1493 today.
Join us in making New Bedford a cleaner place. Recycle more, New Bedford!